So fellas, we've just had UFC Fight Night Emmet versus Murphy, where Lerone Murphy picks up a fairly uneventful decision over Josh Emmett. I'm going to be completely honest, that might be the worst watching card I've ever seen. That might be the worst card I've ever witnessed live. That card was absolutely awful, and this is the perfect representation of the way that the UFC is going. That might go down as the worst card of 2025. We're going to be going through every individual fight. There's nothing significant to talk about, apart from how shit this entire card was from start to finish. The first fight, we had Vanessa Demopoulos versus Talita Alencar. Alencar wins a decision by essentially just out-grappling Demopoulos for the majority of the fight. The fight sucked. It was Alencar on top position against Vanessa, threatening a couple of submissions, but she was just holding the submission attempt without actually finalizing the submission. Women MMA sucks. We want 2019 Women MMA back, or just MMA back in general, because this should not be in the UFC regardless. This isn't UFC worthy. There's two awful strikers. They both looked horrible on the feet. They both looked like they'd never taken a striking class in their life, even though Alencar was the one landing on Demopoulos, if anything. And it ended up being a bit of a grappling match with nothing significant to note, apart from Alencar just out-grappling Demopoulos for the majority of the fight. Dominant win for Alencar. She won all 3 rounds, and she did it in pretty dominant fashion. You know, there's nothing that Demopoulos could really do. She threatened a heel hook a few times that she wasn't able to get. But yeah, Alencar dominated the fight, bullied her on the feet, bullied her on the ground. And when I say bullied, I don't mean it was a slaughter. She did the better on the feet. She was beaten, with the boxing, and she did the better on the ground. There's nothing else to talk about. This was a bad start to a bad card, so Women MMA slop. Alencar wins a grappling decision over Vanessa Demopoulos as a huge underdog and gets the win. There's absolutely nothing else to talk about. Then we had Uran Satybaldiev versus Martin Buday. You know the card is bad when an unranked heavyweight fight, including Martin Buday, was one of the better fights on the card. This is obviously short notice. It was supposed to be Kennedy Desikuku, which is a shame because I think he would have ended up getting a knockout in this fight. Martin Buday, now 6-1 in the UFC, beats Uran Satybaldiev in a fair decision. My first takeaway from this fight isn't actually the fight, it's the commentary. Bisping and Cruz on commentary together are actually unbearable. They made this one unwatchable if you were listening through commentary. They kept arguing for the majority of the fight about if the 50-pound or 60-pound weight difference mattered. You've got Michael Bisping saying, it doesn't matter, it's a heavyweight division, 60 pounds isn't anything. Then you've got Dominic Cruz arguing that, 60 pounds is a significant amount of weight, and that's all we really heard for the entire fight, just those guys arguing as they always do. But anyway, I will say this, Satybaldiev is too small for the heavyweight division. I know it was on short notice, he's naturally a light heavyweight, but you could see the size difference, notably a smaller guy, weighed in I think at 220 pounds, which is just about scraping heavyweight too. So if he's going to continue his run in the UFC, he's better off moving down to he's moving down to 205. But the commentary was unbearable, going on about the weight thing. But it was quite a fun scrap. There were times when Satybaldiev clipped Martin Buday and kind of rained a couple of punches, but the majority of the fight was Martin Buday outboxing Satybaldiev. They both had a go. They both had a bit of a scrap. They were both a bit bloody. There was times in the fight when Martin Buday did what Martin Buday does in every single fight and hold people against the cage. He's got really bad takedowns, as does Buday, but he has a very big belly, so he ends up kind of holding people against the cage. He is good in the clinch, I will say that, but every now and then when he's done enough striking, he'll have a break and go in the clinch. But it was a decent scrap on the feet. They both had offensive boxing. They both put each other in danger. I think there was a time in the fight when Martin Buday dropped Satybaldiev too, and it looked like he was going to go for a finish, but instead he just went straight back into a clinch. I will say this about Martin Buday as well. He is the best unranked heavyweight. Like, there isn't a single guy unranked at heavyweight, apart from maybe Mario Pinto, who's had one win in the UFC, who's better than Martin Buday. He's a good judo guy, good in the clinch, decent boxer, decent pace across 3 rounds, but he's just not good enough to make it into the top 15. I think apart from maybe Mario Pinto, Martin Buday beats everybody unranked at heavyweight, but I don't think he beats anybody ranked in the heavyweight division. If he's like borderline ranked, if there was a top 16 ranking, he would be ranked, and I don't think he beats Kennedy Desikuku if they were to fight, because he is quite hittable. He's Martin Buday. Desikuku's a good, powerful boxer. I reckon he would have clipped him, but it was a decent scrap. I don't think Uran should be cut from the UFC. It was on short notice. He came up to the heavyweight division. He put up a decent scrap and he lost a decision. I think if he moves down to 205, give him a lower level 205 fight. And for Martin Buday, give him another opportunity at the rankings. Maybe you rebook the fight with Desikuku because, beating Uran doesn't say anything significant. Maybe you give him like somebody else in the top 15. I'm not sure what you do with Martin Buday, but it does have to be somebody ranked. Decent scrap. Better than what I expected for a Martin Buday fight. And it is what it is. But the commentary in this And it will be a reoccurring theme with Bisping's awful commentary, which I'll get onto in some later fights, that kind of ruined this fight. Them bickering back and forth about the weight issue and everything like that. It was hard to watch. Anyway, next fight, we had Victor Henry versus Pedro Falcao. Victor Henry wins a decision. This was a pretty good fight, in my opinion. Victor Henry had a couple of issues with the grappling from Pedro Falcao, but was able to reverse it nearly every time and was just winning the fight on the feet until Falcao gassed, and Victor Henry just picked him apart in the third. But yeah, I thought this was a really fun fight. I had the perfect mix of output striking and busy striking. I was meant to put busy grappling, that's a typo. But yeah, Victor Henry was doing the better on the feet. He was obviously the sharper boxer, was obviously the crisper striker, was picking apart Pedro Falcao on the feet. But there were a few times when Falcao was able to clip Victor Henry every now and then. When it came to grappling, Falcao seemed like the better grappler in this fight. He was taking down Victor Henry, dictating the pace, and he was able to get a couple of successful takedowns over Victor Henry, but he wasn't able to keep dominant position. He got the back of Victor Henry like 3 or 4 times in this fight, and every single time he got the back, Victor Henry within 10 or 15 seconds would just reverse position. It was also quite frustrating to see every single time Victor Henry got back up, Pedro Falcao would kind of just lay there pulling guard, and then it was just about a stage about 15 to 20 seconds where Victor Henry would just kick the legs of Falcao while he was on the ground, and that's never a fun thing to see. But it was a good win for Victor Henry. He had the better shots on the feet against Pedro Falcao, who I thought was going to win. Amazing grappling reversals. Did struggle a bit with the wrestling, which is something he's going to have to work on, but had a good win. That is probably the UFC done for Pedro Falcao, though. He's 0-2 in the promotion. The UFC don't really tend to sign fighters who have lost more than once in the UFC, so he's now 0-2. I think he needs to go back to the drawing board. Again, didn't perform terribly, but he eventually gassed out. He was getting outclassed on the feet, and he couldn't really maintain dominant positioning on Victor Henry, which he showed in the regional scene. So I think for Pedro Falcao, go back to the regional scene, get some more experience. And for Victor Henry, I'm not really sure what you do with him. To be honest, I don't really care. But he had a good performance in this fight and beat him fair and square everywhere the fight went. And it was actually, again, a pretty decent scrap. Then we had Loma Lookboonmee versus Istela Nunes, where Lookboonmee wins a fairly close decision. I will say this about Loma Lookboonmee. For someone who was a -1,000 favorite going into this fight, she definitely didn't, well, it definitely didn't seem that way in the fight. It was a very close decision. Istela Nunes started raging after she lost the fight. She's probably going to get cut from the UFC, so I don't blame her for raging. She's just lost her job. But Nunes is now 0-5 in the UFC, but I still think she's UFC worthy. I know that's kind of crazy to say for somebody that's lost 5 times, but she made it competitive against Loma Lookboonmee on fairly short notice. And even though she lost, again, she made it competitive against a fairly solid Muay Thai striker. She would have beaten Molly McCann. I was always saying in the build-up to this fight against Molly McCann that she was supposed to have at UFC London, that if this was to happen, Molly McCann would knock her out. It's an easy fight. If that version of Istela Nunes showed up against Molly McCann, she would have won the fight. But Loma Lookboonmee does the better with the grappling, eventually takes down Istela Nunes in the second and the third round. Mainly in the third round, it just maintains dominant position. And on the feet, it seems like she was doing a little bit better on the feet, so she managed to get the win. She looked improved with the grappling as well compared to previous fights. I remember she used to be really one-dimensional, whereas now she has improved the grappling. But again, nothing crazy for a -1,000 favorite, you know what I mean? Like, she definitely didn't seem like a -1,000 favorite in this fight. It was a very, very close fight. I don't know if that's Loma Lookboonmee having an off night or Istela Nunes showing up better. Maybe they're both. But I think a judge gave it 30-27 to Loma Lookboonmee, which is a dodgy scorecard because I thought Istela Nunes at least won the second round in this fight, or at least the first round. I don't think all 3 rounds should have gone to Loma Lookboonmee, so she got a good win, I guess. Beat her on the feet, beat her with the grappling. Nothing significant to talk about in this fight. Again, quite a dull, uneventful fight with nothing really to talk about. Maybe that's just a common theme of women MMA, or maybe this card was truly cursed, but she wins a decision 30-27 over Istela Nunes as a -1,000 favorite. Nothing really to talk about, is what it is. Then we had Rhys Mckee versus Daniel Frunza. Rhys Mckee has not only earned himself and saved his job, but he's now also probably got himself a 50k bonus. Probably with the best highlight on the card. Goes against Daniel Frunza and probably got a 10-7 round. Definitely a 10-8. Obviously, it ended up getting stopped after the first round. But yeah, just absolutely battered Daniel Frunza. Went in there all guns blazing. He does have a defense issue, does Rhys Mckee. Leaves his chin wide up in the air. But he was able to clip Daniel Frunza. Dropped him 4 times in a single round. Battered him, bruised him, bullied him. I don't know how we didn't get a finish, but eventually won the fight via doctor stoppage after the first round. But yeah, this was a much needed win for Rhys Mckee because he's looked the UFC worthy. You know, he's dominating people in Cage Warriors, and even in the UFC fights, he's having these quite close competitive fights. Obviously, he had to face Chimaev in his debut, and then he comes in there against Daniel Frunza and just blows through him like a hot knife. drive through butter. First UFC win, that's going to give him confidence that he really needed, because obviously if you lose 6 times in the promotion, you ain't getting re-signed. So he got that much needed win. Just absolutely beat the crap out of Frunza, just beat him apart with the boxing, dropped him 4 times, was picking him apart, the rips to the body as well. Frunza couldn't really do anything. There was a couple of times when he was able to clip Rhys Mckee coming in. I don't think Rhys Mckee goes too far. Again, like I said, he's been beaten a couple of times in the promotion against lower level guys. His chin is wide up in the air. Daniel Frunza came straight from the contender series, but it is what it is. I'm still confused how Rhys Mckee didn't get a finish in the first round. Like, I thought Jason Herzog, after he got dropped for the 4th time or 3rd time, whatever it was definitely going to stop the fight there and then. He got face planted, and then Rhys Mckee was following up with shots, so I was kind of worried that there was going to be some sort of curse around Rhys Mckee where he gets so close to a finish, then gets caught and knocked out, but he eventually got the stoppage by doctor stoppage, which again was kind of controversial because the doctor stopped it because there was a bit of a cut on the lip of Daniel Frunza. I'm like, dude, he's in the octagon fighting in the UFC and you're stopping the fight because of a little cut on his lip. It wasn't even that bad of a cut, but good win for Rhys Mckee. Every single one of his wins are by finish. He's a very dangerous striker, a fun guy, good performances, beat the brakes off Daniel Frunza. Probably got a 10-7 if that round was to be scored, or at least at the very best a 10-8. So dominant UFC win, first win in the UFC. That's going to give him confidence, and I'm excited to see what he does next. Then we had Dione Barbosa versus Daina Belbita. Barbosa gets a submission in the very first round against Daina Belbita. I expected Barbosa to win this fight, and that's exactly what happened. It was a fairly competitive fight in the theater, but I thought Barbosa was due better, and then when she decided to take it down to the mat, she dominated. The second that she just decided, you know what, I'm done giving Belbita a chance on the feet, she shot a takedown, got it effortlessly, was eventually able to get to dominant submission. I forgot exactly what submission it was, but she got it with a submission whenever she wanted to, and submitted Daina Belbita and got a good win in the UFC. Yeah, Belbita needs to be cut from the UFC. I think she's like 2-6 in the promotion, or she's got a terrible record in the UFC, almost as bad as Istela Nunes' record. And if you're 0-2 in the UFC against Molly McCann, that should instantly get you cut from the organization. She's 0-2 to Molly McCann. She actually got submitted by Molly McCann last year, or the end of 2023 anyway. In the last 2 years, she's been submitted by Molly McCann, which, as we've seen over the years, has aged terribly, and now she's just been submitted by Barbosa. I don't think Belbita's UFC worthy. She doesn't look good on the feet. Her grappling's awful. Good win for Barbosa. Again, nothing really to talk about because the card wasn't stacked enough to the point where this fight means absolutely nothing for the UFC. Then we had another controversial fight. Torrez Finney versus Robert Valentin. Middleweight, you have a Mario Batista who looks and disguises as Val Woodburn. Torrez Finney starts off the first round kind of in a dominant fashion, dunks Robert Valentin multiple times, dominates him with his wrestling as you expect, and then after like the first half of the first round, it's genuinely just Torrez Finney holding him against the cage, getting separated, holding him against the cage, getting separated, holding him against the cage, getting separated, and this is exactly why the UFC took him 3 contender series opportunities to sign him to the UFC. Gets a really boring win. Boring ass fight for Torrez Finney. I know there's a lot of hype for Torrez Finney going into this fight. People liked him. He had a likable personality. He had an interesting build. He had 3 wins on the contender series that people were rooting for, and they wanted to see an underdog story. After this fight, definitely nobody rooting for Torrez Finney. Awful performance, just like the ones he had in the contender series. 0 finishing instinct. Not once in that fight did he try and get a finish. Not once in that fight did he go for the kill. It wasn't even like you could blame it on like an off performance where, oh, I didn't look that good tonight. No, it wasn't even an off performance. It was a choice that you made to be a bitch. You didn't want to go for the finish. You didn't want to at least engage in a fight. I'm not saying you needed to, swing with Robert Valentin and give him a chance, but holding people against the cage might be the most coward move in the UFC for any type of style. He needs a big win in the UFC. They might honestly cut him. We might come to Tuesday, Wednesday next week and find out that Torrez Finney's been cut from the UFC and he needs to go back to the contender series and get a win, and it wouldn't surprise me. He needs a big win in the UFC, and when I say a big win, I'm talking about a finish or at least an entertaining fight, or else it wouldn't surprise me if the UFC cut him from the organization. And to be fair, even though there's going to be a few sympathizers, I'm not bothered if he gets cut from the UFC if he's going to be having performances like that. But I will say, how do you beat Torrez Finney? Like, this dude is a 5'6" or whatever he is in the middleweight division, compressed ball of muscle. I think he actually might have one of the most interesting builds in UFC history. How do you avoid his wrestling? He's so thick. I know that sounds dodgy, but the dude's just so thick for the middleweight division. How do you beat this guy? If he gets a hold of you, you ain't beating him. Robert Valentin's quite a big dude for the middleweight division, and the second that Torrez Finney got his hands locked, he just dunked him on his head. He's a unique guy, Torrez, Finney. Unique build. People want to root for him, but when you're having boring performances like that, it's going to kill a fan base. I'm interested to see what Daina White does with him, with the matchmaking. Maybe they force him into a dogfight. Maybe they give him somebody too good for his own good. I'm not sure what they do, but you can't be having boring performances. There was a bit of a controversial scorecard as well by one of the judges from a boxing background where they gave it 30-27 to Robert Valentin. Even though I don't think that should have been the case, at this point, if these are the type of fighters we're getting in the UFC, I'm not too bothered about a 30-27 Valentin when you're having stinky performances like that. And if I'm going to shame the likes of Ankalaev for holding Pereira against the cage, it's only fair for me to absolutely dig into Torrez Finney for holding Valentin against the cage. Terrible performance. If he has another one of them performances in the UFC, cutting from the organization, terrible fight. Next fight we had in the main card, Louis Gurule versus Odi Osbourne. Odi Osbourne clips Louis Gurule, another guy who's probably going to be getting a performance bonus with one of the only finishes on the card, where Odi Osbourne knocks him out in the second round and gets a good ground and pound finish. Great KO by Odi Osbourne. Probably saved his UFC career. You know, he'd lost the vast majority of his fights in the UFC. He was coming off a good win, or a good fight, should I say, at UFC 306 against the Ronaldo, the Mexican dude. And he needed this win, because if he'd have lost this fight, I reckon they'd have cut Odi Osbourne from the UFC, but he got a career-saving knockout against Louis Gurule, who's a tough guy to beat. First round starts, Gurule dominates him with the wrestling. Second round, Odi Osbourne finds his range and knocks him out. My Osbourne, he might be basic in terms of skill. I don't ever see Odi Osbourne making it into the top 15 of the flyweight rankings, but he does master the basics. You know, he's quick, snappy on the feet, and he's just such a high-paced fighter where you just can't give him a chance. Like, he almost finished Ronaldo Rodriguez in his last fight at UFC 306, and he let the finish just go out of his hands. Definitely didn't let that happen in this fight. Great win for Odi Osbourne, back in the winning column, saved his UFC career with a good knockout, and yeah, good win for Odi Osbourne. Then we had Brad Tavares versus Gerald Meerschaert. Yeah, Brad Tavares just beats Gerald Meerschaert again. It's a theme of this card. Listen, what do you want me to talk about? Brad Tavares keeps the fight standing and picks apart Gerald Meerschaert for three rounds straight. Apart from a bit in the second round where half of it was just Gerald Meerschaert holding Brad Tavares against the cage. Yeah, Tavares, I will say this, is an amazing anti-grappler. We all knew coming into this fight he has some of the best takedown defense records in the middleweight division, and he showed it again in this fight. I know Gerald Meerschaert isn't necessarily a heavy wrestler, he's more of a BJJ guy, but he was able to defend every single takedown from GM3, was able to keep the fight standing, and he's an amazing anti-grappler. And even though he's a very basic striker and he doesn't really go for the kill, which is a shame, because I think if Brad Tavares went for the finish, he'd be a much more entertaining fighter. He is effective with what he throws. You know, he is a basic but effective fighter, and GM3 at this point is a bit of a win-loss fighter in the UFC, you know what I mean? He's got amazing Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, some of the best submissions in the UFC, but he's awful with everything else. He's big for the division, obviously packs a bit of a punch, but his striking defense is awful, offense is awful. His wrestling could even be worked on. Good win for Brad Tavares, back in the winning column. Both of these guys are win-loss fighters at this point in the middleweight division. I'm not sure what we do to Gerald Meerschaert next. Maybe give him some up-and-comer in the middleweight division for him to submit. And for Brad Tavares, again, there's not really much you can say, because he's not going to go on to make it into the rankings when he's a win-loss fighter. So it was a good win for Brad Tavares. Was able to piece up Gerald Meerschaert, 1-2 down the pipe every now and then. Could have gone for the kill, but decided not to, and was able to defend every takedown from Gerald Meerschaert, and just got the win. Then we had Cortavious Bingo Wing Romious versus Chang Ho Lee. One of the better fights on the card, to be fair. Chang Ho Lee gets a TKO in the second round via ground and pound. Now, straight off the bat, in pretty much every single striking exchange, Cortavious Romious was swinging for the fences. It's almost as if he knew that if this fight went to the mat, he's fucked. So he just swing for the fences against Chang Ho Lee, swinging out there, trying to get the knockout. Chang Ho Lee would close the distance, get the takedown, and would take down Cortavious Romious and beat him with ground and pound, and got the TKO in the second round. My main takeaways is, holy shit, brutal finish by Chang Ho Lee with the ground and pound. I'm a massive fan of Chang Ho Lee. I think he's a really good grappling prospect, because even on the Contender Series or Road to the UFC, he's a very busy grappler. He doesn't just take people down and try and hold them down to the ground like a couple of guys on this card did. Torrez Finney. He actually looks to deal damage. You know, he took him down and dealt damage with ground and pound and managed to get a finish from it. And he also got a finish on Road to the UFC because of his ground and pound. So he's a really good grappling prospect. I think he's undefeated too. So he's somebody that you need to look out for in this division, is Chang Ho Lee, really good grappling prospect from Japan. And you need to look out for him. Just dominated Cortavious Romious with the wrestling, took him down and dominated him. We all knew that Cortavious Romious struggled with the grappling when we saw it in his last fight against Gaston Bolanos, and he's probably going to get cut from the UFC now because I feel like Cortavious Romious tried to make it entertaining, like I said, swinging at every striking exchange, maybe to hope to get a knockout and save his career, but he's 0-2 in the UFC. He's been finished, or no, he got dominated in one of them and finished in the other. It's probably the end of his UFC run, but, you know, if he can go back to the regional scene, pick up a couple of wins, improve his wrestling and his stamina, maybe he'd get an opportunity to come back to the UFC, but really good win for Chang Lee. Dominant wrestler, gets the TKO, probably, again, going to get a bonus because the rest of this card was complete dog shit, and ends up winning the fight against Cortavious Romious. Then we had the core main event. Yoanderson Brito gets dominated in the grappling department by Pat Sabatini. And I'm not going to lie to you, this was pure domination. You know, Pat Sabatini dominated Yoanderson Brito. Didn't really do much damage. Didn't really put Yoanderson Brito in any crazy submission threats. But did dominate him for the majority of the fight and got the win by decision. But again, the theme of this card, another really uneventful fight. You know, Pat Sabatini took Yoanderson Brito down immediately at the beginning of every round and just kind of, you know, he was looking to get the submissions, but nothing really happened in this fight, to be fair. Yeah, there isn't really much to talk about. It was literally as simple as Pat Sabatini took down Yoanderson Brito and dominated him round after round. If I'm going to give my credit to Pat Sabatini, he's definitely a top 5 grappler in the featherweight division. Featherweight is a division where there isn't really many heavyweight grapplers. You've got Sterling, you've got Bryce Mitchell, you've got Movsar Evloev, and I think you've got to put Pat Sabatini in that mix of amazing grapplers. He comes from a heavy grappling background and he just dominated Brito with the wrestling. He's got really good submission ability too. He couldn't really pull off one in this fight. Dodgy fight IQ from Yoanderson Brito. You know, at one point in the third round, he was able to stuff a takedown from Pat Sabatini, and rather than getting back up to the feet and swinging where he had a chance, he decides to pull guard and go for a guillotine, which ends up with him getting dominated for the rest of the round. But I think Pat Sabatini, give him somebody in the top 15. Now, I know he got knocked out by Diego Lopez a few years ago, but we might be talking about Diego Lopez as a champion in a week from now, so give him somebody in the top 15. Really good grappler. And also, this is another fight where Bisping's commentary was quite controversial. Pat Sabatini took down Yoanderson Brito and didn't really do much damage or anything in the first round. And Bisping started saying it was definitely a 10-8 round. Bisping, you've been commentating for 7-8 years now. Not 8, but you've been commentating for like 6 or 7 years now. You know what a 10-8 round is. That is not a 10-8 round, Bisping. So another bit of a poor commentary performance, but good win for Pat Sabatini. Probably earned himself a spot in the top 15, but again, another really uneventful fight. Just like the main event, Josh Emmett versus Lerone Murphy. I said coming into this fight, if Lerone Murphy's going to win this fight, it's going to be by decision where he just picks apart Josh Emmett. And if Josh Emmett wins this fight, it's going to be by knockout. I picked Josh Emmett. Lerone Murphy got it done and got a fairly uneventful decision. Now, I don't really blame Lerone Murphy for this game plan because, I mean, what's he going to do? Stand and trade with Josh Emmett and get chinned? It was a bit of a lackluster performance. I'm not necessarily blaming Lerone Murphy for this, but again, just nothing crazy from this fight. Lerone Murphy outclasses Josh Emmett, lands the kicks, had a really nice body kick that he went to as well, and it seemed like every time Josh Emmett overswung, Lerone Murphy would go in with a lead elbow, which seemed to cut Josh Emmett open, so he did well and defeated Lerone Murphy. He obviously had a good game plan. I would have liked to see him shoot a few takedowns against Josh Emmett. I know he was never really going to get one, but we've seen in previous UFC fights that he's got good wrestling, so maybe mixing it up, the wrestling could have been a good idea, which Josh Emmett seemed to do. There was a point in that second round where he just picked up Lerone Murphy and flung him off his shoulders, so Josh Emmett definitely tried implementing the grappling, couldn't really get going though, couldn't land that big shot, and Lerone Murphy just outclassed him. And again, Josh Emmett was pointing into the middle of the canvas. Listen, Lerone Murphy's not thick. If he was to go in the middle of the canvas and throw down with Josh Emmett, that might have been one of the worst fight IQ moments in UFC history. I don't know what Josh Emmett was expecting there. Obviously, Lerone Murphy's not going to throw down. You've got to give Lerone Murphy somebody in the top 5 next. I get it. Uneventful performance, but he's undefeated. What is he now? 16-0. 3 ranked wins, just beat Josh Emmett in a main event. He's now going to be ranked number 8, coming off a huge winning streak. You've got to give him somebody in the top 5. Maybe you give him the winner of Yair Rodriguez and Pitbull, maybe the loser of the main event, maybe even like an Arnold Allen. I'm not sure who you give him, but give him somebody in the top 5. I think he's reached that spot. And Emmett is just a low output fighter. Even though you can blame Lerone Murphy for being on the back foot, you've also got to put some blame into Josh Emmett because he's an overhand right merchant. What did he do in this fight, really, did Josh Emmett? I mean, he went for a takedown, flung Lerone Murphy off his shoulders a few few times, but apart from that, it was just him trying to find the overhand right and he couldn't find it, and that was pretty much it. You know, couldn't really get going with the kicks, couldn't really get going with the output, just crawling towards Lerone Murphy, you know, stalking him, and then occasionally throwing the overhand right and going for a boxing combination, which didn't really seem to land. So they both kind of put in a bit of a lackluster performance, but again, I'm not necessarily blaming both of them. It wasn't ever going to be an amazing fight. It was ever going to be Emmet by KO or Murphy by decision. But yeah, that's your fight card. Josh Emmett versus Lerone Murphy, in my opinion, one of the worst cards I've had to stay up for. You know, it's currently 6 AM in the UK and I had to stay up for this garbage. This might go down as one of the worst cards of the year. It sucked. Let me know your thoughts, and cheers for watching.